Thank you for coming out on a pretty miserable night in New York City, and I'm really thrilled to be here. As Almira said, I am not Turkish, but I hope I will be considered an honorary Turk. And I came to Turkey via Greece many, many years ago, and I was on a small island called Kos, which is part of the Dedekanese Islands that hug the coast of Turkey and the Aegean. And from my room, when I would wake up in the morning, the sun would rise over a land I learned was called Anatolia. And that was the land we know as Turkey, the land of Anat, the Great Mother. And in Greek, Anatolia means land of the rising sun. And I would watch these mountains, and they were right across the strait. And I didn't get there until 2 years later when I took a boat with my then 3-year-old daughter to Bodrum. And in the harbor in Bodrum, if you can imagine, this is 1987. And Bodrum was not at all the way some of you may know it now. It was a sleepy little town. And in the harbor, there was a very ancient man with a very ancient camel. And for $5, you could have your picture taken on the camel. But what I remember most is that he took my 3-year-old so that I could go have a glass of Çanakkale wine with my friends. And he took my 3-year-old and sat her on that camel and watched her for an hour for me. And that's my first encounter with Turkey in this beautiful town called Bodrum. I have an area of study and expertise in the connection between language, religion, and culture. And my background, like many of you here, is an immigrant background. My family is immigrants on both sides. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the center of the United States. And my father's family is Polish and Czech. So I grew up hearing this foreign language while I was a child. While on the other side, my mother's family was German and Lutheran. And I should mention, my father's side was Catholic. I was raised in a suburb that might be compared to a Westchester County suburb with a mixture of religions. There was Christians of all kinds. There were Jews and Muslims in my community. We stuck to our own back then, but what I remember most is going from I'd go to a synagogue. I was at a mosque when I was a child. I was in all kinds of churches, and what I could never understand, and I still can't to this day, hence part of the reason that Turkey's so important to me, I can't understand all the conflict over religion at all. Within Turkey's borders, and if I'm telling you things you know, forgive me, but they were discoveries for me. The Fertile Crescent begins in Turkey with the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and they come down into Iraq and Syria. Abraham, the prophet, set off for the Promised Land. I say that in a metaphorical terms, from Haran, which is in Turkey. I've been to Mount Ararat because I wanted to find the Ark, and there's been great literature. I'm trying to think who the author is, but it may come to me. He wrote a beautiful story about Victorians who go to find the Ark on Mount Ararat. And Mount Ararat is called the Mountain of Pain. And part of the reason for that is lots of people have lost their lives on that particular mountain. A, trying to find the Ark, and B, because of earthquakes, landslides of snow, snowslides, I guess it'd be called. So Turkey, or Anatolia, caught me because of all the stories within the borders. I've been to Antakya. Well, that's where the first Christian church is. That's where the cave is. All of this is within one country, and I've only mentioned the tip of the iceberg. So I came to Turkey the first time. My daughter was a small child. There was the man with the camel. I'd never seen a camel before. So, of course, these kinds of things can appear exotic. But more importantly, it was about the warmth. And that's what has attracted me to Turkey from the beginning. When I'm in Turkey, and I will read some excerpts shortly, I feel like I'm back with my Polish and German families of my youth. I have been welcomed in any home I've been in, and that includes the wealthiest home in Istanbul, and that also includes outside the city of Van, a Kurdish family who had a house that was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet. And I stayed there for the night, and I was given the only blankets, etc., and the only food that I saw. I was an honored guest, and it was one of the best nights of my life. The story with that is they made, and you would know the Turkish name for it, and you can certainly shout it out, but we call them bulgur balls because they made these lovely kofta with bulgur. And you'd finish 3 or 4, and you'd see no one else from the family eating, and next thing I know, 3 or 4 more would be on my plate. And my co-author, Angie Brenner, who wrote the book with me, is very petite and tiny, and what she would do is start putting her bulgur balls on my plate because I'm bigger. And I became the designated eater. And on our travels, because we are so well welcomed and because so much food is offered to us, we take turns being the designated eater in various places. So what I thought I'd do is read some excerpts from the book to give you a flavor of my experience. And I thought I would start with a disclaimer, which I think is a good idea, because everything is story, right? These are my memories. And so I'm going to start with this Turkish proverb, and excuse my pronunciation. Bir varmış, bir yokmuş. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. For nearly 20 years, Turkey has been a part of our lives, and I say our lives because this book is co-written. For nearly 20 years, Turkey has been part of our lives. For more than 10, we've traveled together, sharing adventures and misadventures. We never found the dangerous country so many Westerners fear. Instead, we discovered a beautiful, vibrant, diverse culture as complicated as our own. We've chosen to use the word Anatolia in our title, derived from Anat, the great mother goddess. Within Anatolia's borders, we visited places we read about in history books, the Bible, and in myth. Mesopotamia, the Pontus, Cappadocia, and the Fertile Crescent. But it was in Mary Lee Settle's memoir, Turkish Reflections, a biography of place, that we first came across the phrase, bir varmış, bir yokmuş. Maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. Throughout our journeys, the phrase has stayed in our minds. Reality is framed within our memories. Maybe it happened, but then again. So what I thought I would do is read a small section. Angie and I have traveled to all of Turkey's borders. We spent some time in Trabzon, and there we were invited to teach at an English school. And I will share with you the experience of teaching extraordinarily bright young men and women who knew a little bit more about life, I think, than we did. So to do the setup, the school is called the Grand Basic School of English, and we just thought that was such a great title. And we were there mainly to observe how English was taught, and the idea would be that we would stay and we would learn Turkish. And here's another thing I have to tell you. I know certain Turkish phrases. When I hear people talking, I can pick up conversation. I've never learned Turkish because so many people speak better English than I do. And I end up speaking English. So hopefully we could change that in the future. So I will start here. On Mirage Street, we join a crowd of young people in slow-slung jeans and denim jackets cruising shops selling diesel jeans and Dolce & Gabbana knockoffs. Stylish young women have wrapped silky headscarves over top-knotted hair, tying them behind their necks like Grace Kelly, ready to take a cruise in Cary Grant's convertible. Beneath a flashing neon palm tree next to a 5-foot-long neon skewer of meat, teenagers gather at the formica tables of a fast food joint called Kebab Island. Next door, an equally tall red neon chicken grins and advertises another restaurant, Chicken Land. Sidestepping school children in crisp blue smocks and white Peter Pan collars, we dart down an alley, past shops selling stationery, underwear, and vegetables, and stop in front of a metal door next to a shoe shop. "Welcome to the Grand Basic School of English," says Farouk, our host. He swings open the door, turns on a light attached to a timer in the stairwell, and hurries up the staircase before the lights click off. A wiry man dressed in tan sweater tucked into brown corduroys greets us on the landing. "Ah, my American teachers," he says, embracing Farouk. "This is Nouri," says Farouk, his cheeks reddening at our puzzled stares, one of the owners of the school. "Banama soruyorsun," says Nouri, and excuse my Turkish, pointing an index finger at his chest, his smile set off by flirtatious dimples. "Ya talking to me?" He bursts into laughter at his dead-on imitation of Robert De Niro in the movie Taxi Driver. "Ah, forget about it," he says. "Come and meet Miriam, our head teacher." Angie shoots me a look that suggests she too thinks there's a bigger agenda underfoot, but neither of us is sure what it is. In a small office, Miriam, a statuesque young woman in a lavender turtleneck and black knit pants, rises from behind a wooden desk. Nouri checks his watch. "Class begins in 10 minutes, he says, and darts down the hall. With a sisterly smile, Miriam motions us to sit on a leather bench across from her desk. "Farouk told us all about you," she says in an accent straight out of Canada's heartland. "We were hoping you would help teach Nouri's class tonight." We glance at Farouk, who sits in a chair by the wall smoking a cigarette. "I think you will enjoy the students," he says sheepishly. Miriam explains that she's half Canadian and half Turkish. "My mom is from Montreal," she says, "but my dad was born in a village in the mountains outside Trabzon." Her cheeks flush a delicate rose beneath ink-dark eyes. She practices Islam but was raised Roman Catholic. "Miriam is the Turkish name for Mary, the mother of Jesus," she says. "You will go to the Sumela Monastery, yes?" "Of course," says Farouk when I glance at him. A student brings glasses of tea on tiny blue-rimmed saucers. Miriam leans forward and with a sisterly smile drops 2 sugar cubes into her glass. "After college, many of my friends got jobs and moved into apartments," she says. "I was thinking about taking a job in the States, but I didn't want a life where neighbors are strangers. 3 years ago, I came to visit my father's family for the summer dance festival and met Nouri, who offered me a job." We expect her to share stories about the culture shock of moving to an Eastern Turkish city, but she further surprises us. "I learned something about myself," she says. "I like the closeness of community here, and I believe I can make a difference, especially for the young women who take English classes." So we spent some time there, and the next thing we know, we're invited to teach English. And we're thinking, how do you teach English to English students? And we're just basically dropped into this class. Farouk leans against a windowsill in the back of the room, looking very happy to have brought us to his students. I smile at a young woman in a pink headscarf sitting in the front row and begin. On a world map against the chalkboard, I point to Wisconsin, and Angie points to Michigan. "This is where we were born," I say. "But where is your family from?" asks a student who sits in front of Farouk. At first, I don't understand. "Your ancestors, were they born in America?" the student clarifies. "Oh," smiles Angie, pointing to Poland, Holland, and Germany. "They were born in Europe." "And my grandparents came from Germany and Poland," I add. "But I had a Native American great-grandmother who was from the Chippewa tribe in North Michigan," adds Angie. With her index finger, she traces Michigan's mitten-like shape, her fingers resting on its border with Canada. "You could say America is like Turkey. We're a mix of many people and cultures." A number of students raise their hands at the mention of their country. "What do you think about Turkish food and the Turkish people?" asks a student named Salman. "The Turkish people are wonderful, and we especially love Turkish food," I say. "You must try our hamsi," he adds. "Anchovies from the Black Sea. They are the most delicious food in the world." "We know all about hamsi," says Angie, eliciting giggles from the students. In fact, we hope Farouk will bring us to a restaurant that serves fried hamsi. Farouk laughs, assuring the class that hamsi is on our agenda. "If American houses are so big," asks a female student, "why do young people move away from their families before they are married, like Miriam has told us?" We attempt to explain as best we can that our culture prizes personal independence and encourages young people to live on their own, but none of the students are buying it as a reasonable idea. They say they want to be with their families. Angie and I have spent countless evenings in Turkish homes where the extended family gathers every week. Halfway through the lesson, Salman again raises his hand. "You're President Abraham Lincoln. He was Turkish, yes?" Several students banter back and forth in Turkish and repeat the word melanjon. "Speak in English," says Nuri, who explains that Abraham Lincoln is said to be a melanjon, which he defines as an American of Turkish descent. "Your Elvis Presley was a melanjon too," adds Salman. Our blank expressions lead Nuri to tell us a story. In 1570, after an Ottoman Turkish sailing fleet was destroyed by a band of pirates in the Atlantic Ocean, British Captain Francis Drake captured several hundred Turkish and Portuguese sailors, abandoning them on Roanoke Island in what would become the state of Virginia. Years later, when the English returned, the sailors had vanished and were said to have assimilated with Native American tribes and to have moved into Kentucky and Tennessee, where Abraham Lincoln and Elvis Presley were born. Nuri says the word melanjon is a corruption of the French word mélange, melting pot, but he also gives an alternate explanation in which the Arabic word melang means ill omen and the Turkish word jan means soul. A melanjon is said to be a lost soul abandoned by Allah, says Nuri, meaning one who is lost from their country, family, and religion. To be Turkish and President of America, that is something special, yes? Says a pale, green-eyed young woman named Halide. It is, I say. Angie and I have seen many connections between Turkey and America, but we've never heard of this one. How many of you want to visit America, I ask. Since this is an English class, I expect most of the students to raise their hand. Only 2 hands go up, both belonging to girls without headscarves, dressed in jeans and sweaters. I want to see California, says one of the girls, smiling at Angie, and maybe learn to surf, she giggles. Her friend seated next to her laughs and gives her a nudge. I am learning English so I can study your culture, adds the other girl, braiding and unbraiding a length of licorice black hair. But I will never go there. I think it is too dangerous. Your president talks of war, and besides, everyone has guns. We're used to hearing our family and friends warn us to be safe in Turkey, but we've not considered that traveling in the US might seem just as dangerous to these students. English is the language of business, says Salman. But anyways, I think it's impossible for us to go to America. It is not so easy to get visas, but I will travel to Britain. Or maybe Canada with Mariam, says Halide. The conversation veers into families, siblings, and fashion. 30 minutes past the allotted class time, a knock at the door stops the conversation. A man in a bushy sheepskin wig bursts into the room and romps through the aisles, pretending to butt heads with Farouk. We recognize Nuri beneath the wig. He'd slipped out near the end of class. Laughter erupts. Affection radiates from the students' faces. So that was part of our experience in Trabzon. Part of what I was looking for in traveling to Turkey began when I was in college. I was really interested. I was raised Roman Catholic, and my mother is Lutheran. There was a Saturday when I turned 7, or Sunday when I turned 7, Easter Sunday, when I went to, we 4 children and our parents went to church at my mother's church, a Lutheran church, sat through the service, and there were a few things missing to me. What was missing most importantly was a statue of the Virgin Mary. And one of the things for anybody who's familiar with the Catholic faith is we have gory images, we have martyr images, and we have beautiful images. And one thing we have is Mary. And for many of us, especially young girls, she became a focal point. She's a mother, she had this baby. And when you're a kid, all of this is in context of stories. So we went to the Lutheran church. There was no Mary in her niche in the altar. There was Jesus on the cross with his nails, and that is for a different talk. And we get done with the service, and we're standing out in the sunlight, and we're kids are thinking, yes, this is finished. We get to go home. And we are herded across the street to my father's church, the Catholic church, because in the Catholic faith at that time, going to my mother's church service didn't count. And in order that we did not go to hell, we needed to go to another church service. Well, 7's an interesting age in child development, if you know anything about it. It's the moment we start to move beyond magical thinking, and our brains develop, so we start to have a more intellectual processing going on. From that day on, I questioned everything about religion. And what it led me to do was to learn about faiths. So I did the gateway in the classic way a young Western woman might. I went to Rome, of course. I went on to Greece, and I learned about somebody named Artemis. And if you know who Artemis is, or Artemis in Greece, she goes back to the dawn of humankind. Her figure is that of a bear. And the bear, if you go back to the caves of Lascaux, back to the earliest dawn of our consciousness, the bear was considered the great mother. And there are, if you go to these caves, you will see a trajectory straight through to modern times where, particularly on a particular cave on the island of Crete, she is now worshipped as the Virgin Mary. Artemis is absolutely connected to Artemis of Ephesus. And Artemis of Ephesus is connected to Anat, for which Anatolia is named, the great mother goddess of Mesopotamia. There is a goddess in Urfa who's called Attar goddess. She is the goddess of the rivers. And she became, in modern times, in the Syrian Orthodox faith, what I call Mer-Mary, where you will see the figure of Mary from the top and the figure of fishes below. And the story of Attar goddess is entwined with the story of the prophet Abraham. And I don't know if you know the story of King Nimrod, who built the stairway to heaven. And King Nimrod ruled in Shah-Urfa, which is one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. And King Nimrod believed in all the gods that existed at the time. Abraham's father, Terah, was an icon maker. And when Abraham was born, Nimrod received a prophecy that Abraham would supersede all of these gods and become the prophet of a new faith. So Nimrod ordered all children to be killed. And the same story occurred with Jesus. The same story occurred with Zeus. So Nimrod ordered all the children to be killed, but Abraham's mother hid him in a cave. And you can go to that cave in Urfa, and what you'll see, which was most interesting to me, is an imprint of the prophet's foot before you enter to make your pilgrimage. What is interesting about that foot is that it's about 1.5 feet long. And by any calculations, that would make Abraham maybe a giant. He would be 18 to 20 feet tall. And you start to understand how, yeah, he's a giant among men, and this is how this faith started to in mythological ways, gain importance over Attar goddess, the mother of the rivers. I'm going to do an aside and come back to this story. If you go to Topkapi Palace, you can see a footprint of the prophet Muhammad. Guess what? The foot is also 1.5 feet. These were giants. I'm going to use my own quotations. Giants among men. Abraham, this is a midrash, or a story that's not in the canon. Abraham, when he turned 12, which is another magical age in childhood development, we're about to hit adolescence. His father was an idol maker. His father asked Abraham he went out on an errand and asked Abraham to watch all the icons in his shop. And there'd be Baal, there'd be Sin, the moon god, all these gods. And Abraham waits for his father to leave, and he looks at all of these, and he says, "Sin, I dare you to speak to me. If you are real, you will speak to me." And the statue remains silent. He looks at the golden calf. I dare you to speak to me. The calf remains silent. So he grabs his father's hammer and he smashes them all, except for one. And into that god he puts the hammer. And when Abraham's father comes back, he's completely bereft. What have you done, son? And Abraham says to his father, Father, there is only one God, and we can't know that God. And if you think there's a different God, ask him. And he points to the one single statue. And of course, the statue doesn't talk. So we're starting to get this changeover to a new faith. Nimrod hears about this. So he orders Abraham captured and taken on a pyre above the city of Urfa, a wood fire, lights the wood. God sees this, blows this fire off the cliff, and it lands in a stream. The fire turns to water, and the wood turns to fish. And those fish can still be seen in Urfa as the sacred carp. However, before they became Abraham's sacred carp, there's an older story, and that is of Atar goddess, the great lady of the rivers. And she was who the ancients prayed to when the rivers overflowed their banks, because particularly the Tigris and Euphrates, as you know, that's the Fertile Crescent. So of course, this was a breadbasket of that region, and in fact, in that region, we found that's where lentils first appear, and also that's where wheat is first harvested as well. And so Atar goddess was an important lady in the fact that if the rivers overflowed, she could kill. But by the same time, she brought nourishment. So as time goes on, there's a changeover in faith. We come to our modern era of the three religions of the region and on into the West. And she is superseded now by the story of the prophet Abraham. But if you go to that region and you go to, say, Mardin, and you go into a number of jewelry shops which are owned by the Christians in the town, you will see on the wall often a painting of a mermaid. And that is Mary, who was once Atar goddess. So I'm telling you all this because you can see some of the things that I've been doing in Turkey and what's interested me. In addition to all of this, Angie's interest was to see the Dervishes whirl in Konya. And we ended up in Konya one December to see the Dervishes whirl. And I will take a couple more minutes and I'll be finished. I'll read a little scene from our adventures at the Dervish Festival. We call the chapter Rumi and Coke. And the reason we call it that is for fun, because there's an old American song called Rum and Coca-Cola. So it's a play on a song. But after we stayed in a hotel which was alcohol-free, and this is one of the things about traveling when you don't know certain cultures and mores. Konya is a dry town, and the hotel we stayed in was a dry hotel. And you know, the ignorance of travel, we didn't realize it, and so we had gone to the festival, and afterwards we get back to our hotel and we ask for raka. And so I'm going to read you just a little excerpt from that, and then we can open it up for a little question and answer. So right before this, we'd been to have baklava and coffee. So we're kind of awake, and this is the reason we want to have the raka, because we think, oh, it'll help us fall asleep. Wide awake from caffeine and sugar, we stop for a drink in the hotel lobby. Two men sitting at the opposite end of the room flick ashes from their cigarettes into the air with each point in their conversation. We'll have 2 raka with water and ice, I say, when a waiter holding a black onyx tray comes to take our order. He nervously grips the ends of his tray. 1 moment, please, he says. I will get Rahim. A minute later, a young man in an ill-fitting black suit and slick black hair walks over to us. The tag pinned to the lapel of his suit says, Manager. I am Rahim, he says. How may I help you? It dawns on us that the Hotel Mahmut booked, frequented by Muslim businessmen and families, might not serve alcohol. Do you have raka, I ask? Rahim jerks his head upward and clicks his tongue no. Then his face softens. We have Coke and, of course, tea. Since the options are either caffeine hot or caffeine cold, we order it in the form of 2 Cokes. Tamam, okay, he says, and hurries away. Carrying a silver dish filled with wedges of lemon and an ice bucket, he returns, followed by a waiter, who sets the drinks on the low table in front of us with a flourish. My shift is ended. May I sit down, the manager says, and sinks into one of the club chairs. You are Americans, yes? I would like to practice my English. Without waiting for our response, he says that he's recently completed the required 2 years of military service and plans to enroll at the university in Ankara to study chemistry. He asks about our families and seems surprised that we've come to Konya specifically for the Dervish festival. Why does your husband let you travel alone, he says, turning to me. Just before I left for Istanbul, I had attended a party in New York City with Fred, who's my husband. I had been standing with a group of his male colleagues when one of them, a lawyer, asked me exactly the same question. Then, as now, I felt my stomach tense in defensiveness. I give Rahim the same answer I gave the lawyer. Oh, but I let my husband travel alone too, I say, adding, only this time I'm not alone, I'm with Angie. It is not good for women to be alone, and you have no husband, he says to Angie with a look of sadness in his eyes. Mr. Wright hasn't come along yet, quips Angie, keeping a light-hearted tone in her voice. But maybe you have an older brother? If Rahim got the joke, he doesn't show it. We haven't seen any other foreign tourists in the hotel, so we might seem as exotic as Martians. The conversation slows and we finish our Cokes, planning to say goodnight, but as soon as we empty our glasses, Rahim orders another round. Ah, Allah must have called you to the Dervish vessel, he says, settling into his chair. His voice takes on a bit of gravity when he says he will soon be married and that his future wife wishes to be a lawyer, but he would prefer she stay at home. A woman should not be a lawyer. He squeezes lemon into his Coke. When she has her monthly time, she cannot control her emotions and she might ruin the case for her clients. Angie leans over and accepts the cigarette Rahim offers. When I remind her that she doesn't smoke, she says, I do tonight, and waits for my response. In the States, women's lawyers sit on the Supreme Court, I say. He considers my words before replying. They are very old, past their childbearing time, and now they have clear judgment. But they've practiced law since they were young women, I say, hoping that I'm making some headway. He finishes his second Coke and looks at our half-empty glasses. Just when we fear he'll order a third round, he checks his watch, thanks us for the conversation, and bids us good night. Now I'm going to read the punchline to that, what happened at the very end. We'd been there for a while, and we saw Rahim all the time, and he became a great friend to us. And we still communicate with him, and he did go to law school. I mean, he went to chemistry school, and his wife is a practicing lawyer right now. We're halfway across the hotel lobby when a voice stops us. Ladies, calls Rahim from behind the manager's desk. Wait. At the elevator, he pushes the button to our floor, holding the door open. I liked so very much our conversation last night, he says. I won't see you in the morning, but inshallah, I hope you will return to Konya. He holds his right hand to his heart, implying that all good rests in the hands of God. Inshallah, we say, pressing our hands to our hearts as the elevator door opens. No sooner do we put on our pajamas and climb into our beds than a heavy knock rattles the door. I get up and crack it open to find a waiter holding a tray covered with a blue linen hotel napkin. He glances down both sides of the corridor before stepping inside the room to place the tray on the table between our beds. Lifting the napkin, he reveals 2 glasses, a small bucket of ice, a water pitcher, and a bowl of pistachios. In the center, taped to a small bottle of raka, Rahim has attached his business card and written a single word across the front. Sherife. Without waiting for a tip, the waiter backs out of the room and quietly closes the door. A passage from one of Rumi's poems floats through my mind. Look, this is love, to fly toward the heavens, to tear 100 veils in every wink, to tear 100 veils at the beginning. Sherife, says Angie. She places 3 cubes of ice in each glass, opens the bottle, and pours.